I have to say that I'm supposed to be Diane Huber, but I'm not. Diane has an injury and was not able to come, so she had called me and Robert had asked me to fill in for her. And I'll do that, and I can talk about Texas a little bit. I can also talk about organizationally the work that we're doing now. I'd heard earlier someone mention that Texas had enacted a statute. It was signed into law last week. It's effective July 31st, which I think may say something about the vision for micro-credentials at state level. There were two education laws or bills that were passed into law by the Texas legislature this year. One had to do, I think, with safety and transportation, and the other one had to do with micro-credentials. I followed this all the way through because Diane Huber was one of the authors of that legislation and helped to shepherd it through the process that resulted in House Bill 2424 being enacted into law. House Bill 2424 establishes a process for identifying continuing education courses and programs that fulfill educator continuing ed requirements, including opportunities to receive micro-credentials in fields of study related to the certification of educators by class of certification. But here's the important part. That's extremely important. However, this bill also mandates in statute that micro-credentials will be shown on an educator's certificate and or on the state's educator online certification system. So that means that it will appear that if you are looking for an educator in the state of Texas, that you will find out not only what degrees they hold and what standing they have in the state of Texas, but you will find out what are their, and I think you used the word Sue, grain-based competencies that they are achieving. The purpose of this work was to ensure that educators were continuing in their continuing education process and to track completers' participation in professional learning and development programs after their initial certification and preparation.
Well, Kentucky has not considered it quite to that depth yet. I do not think we're that far off. But currently, we're looking at micro-credentialing as part and parcel of our continuing education options. I think we're going to be seeing much more of them embedded into instruction in our EPPs. I know that we have districts who are looking at creating their own and adopting some to use for professional learning in their district, but that is where we are at Kentucky right now. We've not even considered possibility of putting them on licenses or anything along those lines as of yet. However, I'm sure that that will become a question that we're going to have to deal with sooner than later.
Well, in West Virginia, we're in somewhere of a similar situation as Kentucky. We have been exploring the world of micro-credentials for a couple of years, and we would be where I consider in the infancy of the micro-credentialing process as far as acceptance. But we have the vision of being able to offer the flexibility for West Virginia educators, not necessarily because of, as some individuals would mention, the ease of going through a micro-credential, obtaining a micro-credential, the cost of the micro-credential, but just for the targeted professional development or growth that the micro-credential will offer to educators in West Virginia to make it meaningful. As many of you may know, West Virginia has a very particular and unique geography to the state, so sometimes those opportunities that for professional development or even for EPPs that offer face-to-face or hybrid courses or opportunities is not extremely conducive for educators from across the state to do this. So our vision is to be able to not take the place of other opportunities or other systems in place, but supplement what's already in place, as well as given other possibilities and options to educators across the state, not only for personal growth, but also for student achievement and impact and meaningful more than anything, rather than what we have been kind of having very deep discussions as far as sometimes the disconnect nature of the professional development that some educators receive that may not be particularly targeted to their own environment. Now in West Virginia with the opioid epidemic and the whole mental and emotional state of affairs when it comes to addiction and other issues that we are suffering across the state. This will be a prime opportunity to create something very meaningful, targeted, as well as very effective for those particular pockets. As I was having a conversation with Robert earlier, what it means for a child or a family in one particular area of West Virginia in the same SES bracket or situation, it's not the same as another town over because of the accessibility to resources or the proximity to things that one may have and the other one doesn't. The micro-credential may be somewhat of an equalizer of opportunities for educators, that they can bring that to the children of West Virginia. So that's our vision, making sure that this is an option, a viable, effective, and successful option that we can provide across the state.
Well, I'm not representing a state education agency, but my organization is a statewide network of schools in the state of Texas. And our vision behind micro-credentials is grounded in the why that our keynote speaker, Marianne, talked about this morning. So our why is basically, just like our friends here in KWEC, my organization, Harmony Public Schools, is also a recipient, was a recipient of the Race to the Top District grants. And through this grant opportunity, we've done some amazing things to bring personalized learning to students, but not for adults. And we know how hard it is to differentiate instruction within the traditional classroom settings for students. Well, it's just as hard to differentiate instruction, professional learning for adults. And we felt that it was about time to simulate these personalized professional learning experiences for adults as well. And micro-credentials felt like the only effective vehicle to do just that. So our organizational vision is to align different components of our human capital management system, such as educator evaluation systems, professional developments, licensure, compensation structures around decisions for career advancements, and putting micro-credentials in the center of that advancement so that we can make educators climb up the compensation and career ladder based on demonstrated competency in their day-to-day practices rather than seniority or seat time.
Thank you. Kind of sitting here feeling like we have college professors there and so on, and then there's me, and more like elementary. So, okay. We're really at the beginning of this, and we've worked with our State Bureau of Educational Examiners for our organization, which is a member-based collaboration consortium of districts. So we don't receive any state funding, we don't receive any federal funding, we have no grants, whatever. Our work is pretty much on the ground, in the weeds kind of thing. But we did work with our State Board of Educational Examiners to be able to use micro-credentials and stack them for licensure renewal credit, which is important to our teachers in the state to maintain their licenses. And so it's been a great vehicle for that. And we just, our vision of micro-credentials is really getting that learning deeply to teachers in ways that make sense to them and that they actually are using in the classroom rather than something that happens outside of the classroom.
Thank you. And our next question is looking at what goals or objectives are you working to meet by incorporating micro-credentials as a professional learning strategy?
My real job is working with a group called Leadership and Education Effectiveness Group, whose purpose is to identify and work with districts and schools that are high need, hard to staff, and have all of the other parameters that may or may not classify them: high need, high minority, high poverty, harder to staff, maybe lower performing. Because what we have learned with a series of meetings and focus groups and working with districts across the country is that most of the time, whether we admit it or not, many of these principals are put into these schools simply on a one slot, one fill assignment basis rather than matched with their skills to the needs of those students and schools. We also have learned that when they're there, the support systems may amount to, in many cases, and I'm being very qualifying about that to not generalize. But more often than not, what we find when we get in there is that the support systems for these principals, school leaders, and teacher leaders in these schools is not much more than maybe visit a few more times and have to fill out a few more questionnaires. The whole coaching piece for school leaders is not, because of resources that districts have, is not there. So how do we hit the most effective mechanism for professional learning for these leaders and for their leadership teams, and systemically for their teachers and teacher leaders? Micro-credentials provide an avenue to do that. It provides an avenue for application and evidence. It provides an application for teaching and reteaching. So does it do something very different than traditional professional learning, professional development does? And our findings are yes, the possibilities are just endless of what can happen in the design of real work, real life application, production, and evidence to be retaught and refocused for others than often happens from traditional professional learning activities.
Thank you. The questions, the goals or objectives are trying to meet by incorporating them. And for us, it would be more along the lines of meeting the needs and supports of classrooms, schools, districts, and regions. There are regions in Kentucky that are almost like being in different parts of the country from other regions, and it's important for those regions to be able to develop micro-credentials that meet the contextual needs of the people and the kids there. I think that's important, just as we need to be able to have a range and depth of micro-credentials to meet the needs of our professionals, whether it's the administrators or it's the teachers, to help them grow around their own problems or practice. And the fact that they can be more individualized and tailored, I think only increases the value by which the teachers would engage in that process.
Thank you. I would have to echo that as well, because as I mentioned before, the goal that West Virginia would have in utilizing micro-credential is, again, that targeted learning, that specific, unique need that a particular school in one district or by county, as they're divided in West Virginia, would have over another county probably 10, 12 miles away. Some of the needs are so unique of the population. We have so many schools with large change in staff, brand new staff members, or what we call first generation, first year teachers in a particular school that need a complete different set of skills, a complete different set of leadership, direction, and options that maybe at other county district or even a school within the same county or district may not have based on their population. So the goal would be to be able to target those particular populations very specifically and give it a meaningful way of not only having that personal growth, but also be a school growth as well, and having that impact in the academic achievement of those students in that particular area. And it's at the same time, because as you may have heard, and it's becoming a little bit more of a trend lately across the country, teachers are wanting their voices heard more and more, and they're asking for more recognition. And within those recognitions, they don't mean necessarily financial recognitions always, but they mean avenues of achieving and excelling in their profession. So we are trying to give them that avenue to be able to get some targeted professional development, professional growth, and use it as an incentive, perhaps for licensure renewal as well, give them an avenue of using those credits based on rule for salary advancement or any other perk that we could be able to provide teachers, educators across the state for recognizing their effort, but at the same time, not be a meaningless effort of just taking random coursework that may or may not be applicable to what they're doing every day or the skills that they need to succeed in their profession. So the goal would be, again, to tailor that uniquely to a wide range of possibilities for all educators across the state.
So our overarching goal has been transforming the culture of professional learning, because it's evident that traditional one-size-fits-all approach to professional development doesn't work. So within that goal, we tried to address 3 pressing issues in our organization, and I feel like based on our conversations with other school leaders, district leaders, these are commonalities in a lot of areas. So number 1 was seeing implementation of professional development in classrooms in large scales. Even when you deliver a world-class PD, the chances are a small fraction of teachers implement that and take it back to their classroom. So it feels disappointing. And even those small numbers of teachers who actually do take it back to their classroom and implement, their efforts go unnoticed. And micro-credentials provide this avenue, this culture of recognition, celebration, and showcasing the talents and expertise of teachers when they do actually implement what they learn in PD. So that was our number 1 goal. And the second one was around how do we make professional learning more meaningful and job embedded for our educators. So we decided to align PD to educator evaluation systems and student outcomes. So that's why all of our micro-credentials are actually providing a rationale for teachers to see how it leads to this change in practice, leads to more effective student outcomes. And the last one was, again, integrating this idea of professional learning into career advancement through micro-credentials, so that educators can see growth opportunities within the organization and make informed decisions to navigate their own personalized learning pathways and make career advancement plans within our organization, which will ultimately improve our educator retention and help us choose the most talented, the right fit educators for leadership roles that will provide them an opportunity culture to extend their impact beyond their own students and colleagues.
Our main purpose and mission is to really create a delivery system for professional learning that especially bridges that knowing-doing gap, that we know stuff, but it's not happening in the classroom, or we don't have the support for it to happen and in the classroom. So not only do we want to know that you know it, but that you can do it. And the best analogy I can give to that is when I taught driver's education. That was in my dumber years. You know, I had kids who could pass every driver's ed test, classroom test that I gave them, ace it, but I wouldn't want to meet them on the street in a car for anything because they couldn't do it. And I think that's the big piece for us with this whole idea of micro-credentials, is bridging that gap. We want real work that's based on real individual needs. That you know, in the rural districts that we serve, there are so many times there's a single teacher in a content area. Who do you talk to if you're the only art teacher? Who do you talk to that has the same exact needs that you do? And then we want to make sure that we provide those resources and tools via the micro-credentials to help teachers and administrators grow in truly useful and meaningful ways. And last, I think, and again, if you were in the session did earlier, I think the biggest thing for us is to not offer professional development, but instead develop a system of DP, developing as professionals. And that's the cultural shift that we want to make, is that people feel like, I want to develop as a professional, I'm being served, my needs are served as an individual and as a professional, and I'm treated as a professional in that route.
One important question that we wanted to make sure that we were able to have this amazing panel discuss, I'm going to skip down to number 5, and that question is, how are micro-credentials incorporated into programs that require regional accreditation, such as CAPE accreditation?
This is a concern for many universities, post-secondary altogether, whether they're technical college, community college, and by the way, I'm not just a university person, so I think from another way, or whether they're senior colleges, graduate programs, undergraduate. If you are CAPE accredited or you have some sort of state approval that might mirror CAPE standards or AQUIP, if that's the direction that folks are going, or if you are not going for accreditation whatsoever, but you want standards to base your programs on, Area 4 of CAPE requires that EPP must follow up with completers to track and assess their development. And that assessment of their development answers the Area 4 requirement to track their assessment and to keep tabs of what's happening in their development. There's been a great deal of discussion about how does CAPE fit. Area 4 is how CAPE fits for micro-credentials. I would hope that would alleviate some of the concerns, but I think they're still going to continue as you try to answer in your own institutions that question.
In our conversations with our EPP so far, the micro-credentials in Kentucky are going to be more or less support curriculum than it would be in terms of taking the place of a pathway. We're not in any kind of conversation yet about utilizing micro-credentials for certification that would have to be CAPE accredited at this point, rather utilizing them as parts of the courses and the pathways to get to certification.
In West Virginia, we also do not have a pathway that leads to initial certification via micro-credential. I don't believe at this point that will be the intent. As with every area of interest, we want to start small, make sure that it is receiving and achieving the results that we would like it to achieve. So we believe that starting with the whole certification arena would be a little bit of a too big of a scope at the moment, because it would entail CAPE accreditation per state policy. It would entail a few other regulations and processes that at the moment I don't believe that we have that capacity in place to follow through in that manner with a micro-credential. However, we are looking at it for certificate renewal. Therefore, it doesn't have impact on CAPE accreditation. We are a CAPE state. Every EPP in West Virginia must be CAPE accredited. However, these are renewal options, not necessarily addition of a new endorsement. The only place that we are somewhat looking into or working with an internal micro-credential of sorts, and I hate to say that because it's not a true micro-credential, but it is a process that mimics job-embedded coursework for existing elementary math teachers and middle school math teachers to elevate them to, due to the math shortage. We have an initiative in West Virginia, Math for Life. For the next 5 years, we're trying to increase not only the number of math teachers across the state, but also the capacity of those existing math teachers within the system. So this is an opportunity that we see to help for instance, a elementary math person, grades K-6, maybe to expand that certification to grades 5-9, which is our middle school, or those who teach through Algebra 1 only, expand that content a little bit forward and not necessarily all the way to comprehensive mathematics. So we see that as an avenue via micro-credential or something very similar to help them achieve that. But however, it has no bearing or impact on state policy regarding accreditation or any sort of initial accreditation rule.
Well, in Texas, currently at least, I'm not aware of any micro-credentialing efforts for accreditation purposes. But as briefly mentioned, the House Bill 2424 will bring micro-credential-based certification and renewal for educators effective September 1st of this year. That's exciting. And the state has previously piloted endorsements for career technical education educators. So we've been inspired as an organization by those efforts, and we're currently expanding our micro-credentialing program for the coming year to create our own endorsements for some of the hard-to-staff educator areas like CTE, STEM education, ESL there's a pretty big population in Texas, special ed, ESL, STEM, computer science. So these are hard to staff areas, I'm sure in other places as well. So as an organization, we're creating micro-credential based endorsements for educators, which they can earn these endorsements through application-based, portfolio-based micro-credentials, and also receive stipend increases, which will help our organization also attract educators in these areas. So that's currently what's happening.
MISIC is not at the state level policy development, and I am not aware of things that are happening at the state level other than some informal conversations among some organizations around micro-credentials. However, we do have in the state the need for, that one of the ways a teacher maintains a license is licensure renewal credit. And we have been granted the ability to provide licensure renewal credit for teachers who successfully complete a micro-credential stack. So that's probably where we're mostly at, although I know there's conversation around the edges. I've not heard of anything official.
What support systems do you have in place to help educators begin and to complete micro-credentials?
Desi, I think that's the $24 million question. Because we are in an infancy stage, we are feeling our way. There are huge examples like, and I'm just going to pick a few, but the Friday Institute, what KVEC is doing, what the state of Tennessee has done, very methodic, very systematic in their approach both to development and implementation and professional learning around them. But the support systems of how to have someone begin this process and complete this process, we really have not worked out. I think consortia like this and the kinds of conversations that are taking place with groups that are so interdisciplinary, like all of us, are what will help forward some system for what Misty is doing, what a charter school system is doing, what a state is doing, what another state is doing, and then what other organizations that are supportive of educator excellence and progress are doing. Without that, we will be operating in isolation, and we will not be able to move effectively past what support systems work for you is fine, but does it work for us? And that's the goal I think that we need to look at.
I don't have anything to add to that.
I wouldn't either because, again, in West Virginia, we are just beginning this process, so there are no systems of support officially in place at the moment.
So this question is something that we've been grappling with in our organization because when we launched micro-credentials, we were somewhat hesitant or even scared. How will educators actually find the time and the motivation to pursue micro-credentials, to start one, get through one, and earn these badges? And so we've learned that embedding micro-credentials into existing professional learning systems is really the key to help educators feel like this is actually not a burden. It's not something we're asking extra. So it feels when micro-credentials are actually part of their existing professional development systems, it feels like an organic process that they go through. And frankly, the reaction they give is, this is already something I'm doing. So again, looking at the workload of teachers, they're all pressed for time. They all have full plates. So it was critical to make sure that micro-credentials don't feel like an added burden, something extra on their plate, which is why we've actually looked at how we support educators before micro-credentials. We have professional learning communities in place. We have instructional coaches who does coaching cycles with them. We have good old PD days. So we aligned micro-credentials into these existing structures. And when we do PLCs, when we do coaching sessions, when we do a PD day or a PD session, whether it's 1 hour or 3 hours or a whole day, centering that around a competency in our existing micro-credentials, And having teachers go through that cycle of inquiry where they sit down, work and collaborate with educators, analyze data, look at a problem of practice, and design and develop a solution for that problem. And then when they leave that PD or PLC or coaching cycle, they go back to their classrooms, ready with a crisp set of action steps to follow, and just implemented that plan in their classrooms and then reflect on it. So we've seen that this approach has been really successful in helping teachers see that this is actually what reflective instruction should look like and feel like, and it's just part of their job. So giving them that extra time and space within the existing PD structure has been instrumental in supporting teachers to start and execute micro-credentials effectively.
Since we're not a school district or a set of schools, but rather a system supporting schools, our biggest challenge has been to really help our districts design a DP system, a developing as professionals system, that includes how they're going to integrate micro-credentials into those support systems they already have or are already beginning, like PLCs, departments, principal-teacher conversations when there's a need and improvement plan, instructional coaching cycles. So, we see those as being really the heart of what we need to do to help our districts use them. We can develop them, but we also need to help them figure out how to most effectively implement them in the classroom. And in a workshop that we were conducting last week in Nebraska on writing micro-credentials and evaluating them, the conversation was kind of like one of those ahas that you have, and that was around when you evaluate the results of a teacher's work on a micro-credential, that's not the moment at which the coaching has to happen. The coaching needs to happen in conversations they're having as they're working on it. And that's where that whole relationships piece is so important for teachers in this, to have others within the system that they can go to, even if it's only digitally, that they can go to and they can talk about the work they're doing and they can talk about what's happening and kind of figure it out, so it's not like, I tried it, now tell me what I did wrong or right, but it's that coaching. So now I bring you almost a finished project for the evaluation, and then we say yay or nay. So lawyers, when they go to take the bar, they don't take the bar and then they get back the results and they say, well, now you could have done this and you could have done that and you could have done this. They go through lots of study groups and coaching and learning together before they ever get to that. And we hope that that's the kind of system that we're embedding with our use of micro-credentials with our districts.
And I think in that, too, to kind of wrap that question up, one piece that I haven't heard our talking about very much through this, but I know is on the top of our heads, which is the purpose of the work that we do, and what is the impact of any kind of professional learning on student achievement. What is the impact on learner focus? What is the impact on equity-centered? What is the impact on ensuring that these pieces are in place? And aren't the support systems then critical more than just systems, but for the purpose of ensuring that professional learning, however it occurs, meets the challenges of equity, learner-centered impact on students?
Okay, and so now we've come to the end of our great panel, but we did want to allow some time at the end for you to have questions, and so we have a microphone out there. And do we have questions from the audience?
In this session before this one, there was a touching on the issue of higher education leaders and their preparation and some possible roadblocks. And so I'd like to ask the panel if they'd like to address any of those issues, because at NEA, we have those members, and we believe that micro-credentials will be an asset and not really anything negative, although they're are some that have been, some points that have been identified. So ask the panel about that.
So who wants to take?
Could you say your question again, please? I think we're looking at each other to make sure we understand.
Could you address the aspects of the impact of micro-credentials on higher education of the leaders in higher education? Maybe pros, cons, or how you basically see it as an asset, perhaps?
I'm afraid we have an assumption, not you, we have an assumption that higher ed and micro-credentials are inherently at odds. And that may or may not be true, depending on who's thinking about it and where we're thinking about it and what the traditions of the thinkers have. But more and more as this day has gone on, I've heard those odds diminish somewhat when we begin to think about not threat, but opportunity, and where the strengths of the foundations in higher ed, where we're mostly all prepared, or the foundations in non-IHE-based programs that are accredited or standards-based, like I teach, which is still the only CAPE and NCATE accredited non-IHE base in the country that is for-profit, but very inexpensive, much less expensive than other programs. So I heard us begin to talk more about merging our thought through this day than the competing thought that I actually heard at NASDAQ when NEA presented their micro-credential program. And would your question then be, rather than what are the thoughts of the leaders in higher ed about this, what I've heard is, what are the thinkings of how we can begin to incorporate this thinking, new thinking, our thinking vision to accomplish better for educators across the country?
Just quickly to add to that, I think the impact of micro-credentials can really be amplified with higher ed involvement, especially when higher ed organizations partner with school districts or regional educational support service centers to really design micro-credentials to address the needs of educators within those districts and service centers. We've done similar work, not with higher ed, but with our other nonprofit partners who provide external professional learning to our teachers. So we co-created micro-credentials with their involvements based on what PD and training they provide to our teachers and transform those trainings into micro-credentialing pathways. And that's been more impactful, to say the least. And those micro-credentials, when created with higher ed and district partnerships, can also be used for pre-service teacher preparation programs.
I think we have time for about one more question.
Hello, thank you for this panel. This was really interesting and provoked a lot of thought. I just had one question. I think we're back to the supports question and perhaps a concern about having policies in place without having the supports ready, and just what the thinking is about how to ensure that as policies get put in place that the implementation goes the way that you expect it to, and whether you think those supports are necessary to ensure that happens, and how to ensure things don't go in a different direction than you are hoping without those supports.
I'll start with just the practical school level application of that one. We had a district who just kind of thought micro-credentials were great, wanted to get involved, and that, immediately at the beginning of the year said, okay, everybody has to pick 2 micro-credentials and finish it by the end of the year as part of your PD. And while that sounds like okay, because they got to pick, right? They got to pick what they wanted to work on and whatever. What happened is that the time they'd allocated teachers to work on that disappeared because we had a great amount of snow in Iowa this year. So time as a support kind of went away. And I think probably more importantly, teachers weren't really brought in on why micro-credentials and how it was different, other than, this isn't just a work through, a module and be done. And I don't think they really had built those kind of systems for having conversation around it. And part of it was because they lost the time. They may have wanted to change their opinion. But I think the key thing was just really helping teachers understand what a micro-credential was and how it would be helpful, and it wasn't, so it wasn't seen as just something that was thrown on them. So I think the support system not only includes that time to collaborate and talk about it and reflect on it with each other, but I think it's just understanding the whole system to begin with.
One of our constant issues or barriers has been communication, because it feels like no matter how much we communicate, it's never enough. We're still in the initial years of implementation, and a lot of the communication has been sort of top-down with centralized focus, because we feel like our local leaders don't yet feel comfortable enough to support the initiative because they haven't experienced it themselves. Because when they were in the classroom, there was nothing like this in their days. So thinking about, again, we're all about how do we make teachers' job easier so they can actually spend most of their time on what matters most, on their students, on instructional design and effective delivery. So providing additional support systems is key to ensure educators implement micro-credentials, to start one. And we've seen that it's really a hurdle to just get over that initial stage of trying out a micro-credential, because the grain size of our micro-credentials is on average about 6 weeks. So it does feel like a long-term project, a semi-long-term project for teachers. And with, they have a demanding job. Every day is a challenge. So it's kind of hard for them when they're left all by themselves to really plan out a 6-week project plan to really get through a micro-credential without support systems like this. So we also had goals for teachers, like everybody has to do 2 a semester. Then we said, okay, let's do 1 a semester. But there were still educators who haven't started any. But it is when we started pairing them with mentor teachers, coaches, to kind of embed micro-credentials into PLCs with the help of PLC facilitators, that's when teachers started picking up the pace and actually getting into micro-credentials and earning 1. And when they earn 1, they actually don't stop and move on to earning 2nds and 3rds. It becomes the norm for them. But still, a large chunk of them didn't get to start when there was not a support system for them within their school or district.
Your question is one that has plagued professional learning forever and ever, as well as just the preparation of teachers and leaders. If you look at budgets in states, if there's a crisis, who gets cut first? Professional learning, many, many times. There have been papers written on that. The support systems to make sure that whatever is the training, the learning, the opportunity, the support systems in place to assure the implementation, the utilization, the teacher, leader understanding, and the ability to make a difference in the classroom is always a question. Maybe we have an opportunity here to reframe how policies and support systems and all of those things having to do with your questions occur. Because you have a schema, a framework in which you've considered that with your work. And if we're careful about it, we may be able to do something different as we approach this new technique that we have not accomplished extremely well before.
From the perspective of a state that is just beginning to do this, it's very important and critical that when we do policy, we create the necessary flexibilities. In West Virginia, the majority, if not all, the professional development is done at the local level. Therefore, there is a great amount of flexibility and local control when it comes to professional development. However, the policies are created around the structure that those systems of support must exist. However, is to be determined based on the need of the local district and county on how they can best provide that support and that service. And our agency is tasked with supporting, providing technical assistance and how to build that capacity rather than prescribe how the professional development or how these micro-credential or other professional growth opportunities must occur. So it's a fine balance on how that policy gets created, therefore to be not only guiding and also ensuring that there is a certain level of quality control across the state, but providing that degree of flexibility that those local systems can put in place what best works for that particular system and not a cookie-cutter approach that must fit the entire state.
And before we let this great panel get away, I'd just like to ask one more question. I know that you all have been doing some fabulous work, but I just jotted this down. But how has the work that you've done with micro-credentialing impacted the way that you approach professional learning?
I can say a few things about that. So doing micro-credentials really helped us see professional learning in a different light. One where we need to actually bring in problems of practice, data analysis into PD, not just into instructional design, but into PD as well. And designing PD around a specific competency, an application-based competency for teachers so that it feels really job-embedded and meaningful for them. So it's not just a sit and get professional learning, one where they actually collaborate with peers and with help from expert facilitators to really pinpoint the problems of practice within their classrooms, look at the right data, and come up with a design, develop a solution to be implemented in their classrooms. And that's how we approach the coaching cycles, the inquiry cycles in our PLCs. And typically when they set a goal within a coaching cycle or come up with goals within their professional learning communities, there's usually a micro-credential that really fits into that goal so that they can actually do the micro-credential together and bring back evidence, and that helps them hit those goals more effectively as teams.
Maybe if we think of the adage, teach them to fish, we may be helping to develop a strategy to help teachers and teach them to fish rather than tell them what they need to know and expect them to do it, which in turn hopefully will model for their teaching kids to fish.
Well, thank you, panel, and let's give our panel a wonderful hand, and I'm going to turn it back over to Robert.